So what if the prequels came first? What if in 1977, instead of A New Hope, you got The Phantom Menace? Or what if in 1977, 1980, and 1983 you never got any Star Wars movies? And it wasn't until 1999 you first saw a movie called Star Wars: The Phantom Menace, Episode 1. What would happen in this timeline of events, and how would it change the Star Wars fan base? How would it change Star Wars itself? And more importantly, how would it change the world? These are very interesting topics that I'd love to go over because, believe it or not, Star Wars has changed a lot in your life, whether you know it or not. And that's something I want to go over today. I'm Star Wars only, guys, and I hope you enjoy this video because I actually think this is a very interesting and touching topic for many Star Wars fans that hasn't really been addressed yet. There's been ideas of what happened if the prequels came out first and how would they be received. Well, back in the 70s and 80s, movie critics were a lot different than they are now. More or less, they're always going to be the same, but their interpretation on things might be different. So in this video, guys, I'd like to look at what would happen if the Star Wars prequels came first. I want to apologize in advance for the length of this video. Theorizing about Star Wars and its time of release in a life without Star Wars is actually very complicated, and if Star Wars didn't have a big cultural impact that it did, it's really hard to think, and it's a very long process and a lot of things I have to cover and talk about. So this will be a little bit of a lengthy video, and it's making it even longer the fact that I'm even talking about it. But let's just get right into it. So there's many variables that come into play when we talk about if Star Wars was released at a different time. If in 1977, there's two ways we can look at this. 1977, Phantom Menace came out, or nothing came out in 1977, and you didn't get the first Star Wars movie until 1999. There's also the variable of 1977 Phantom Menace came out, but it's not the Phantom Menace we know. It is redone with practical effects, different actors, and all that stuff back in 1977. So we have those variables, but I want to stick to the fact of the Phantom Menace basically as is. You can adjust it for whatever the hell into 1977, different practical effects, whatnot. But let's just say the Phantom Menace was released in 1977 in May, and perfectly just like it is right now. I think it would be a huge flop. Because let's look at how things were in 1970s. It had The Godfather. It had movies like The Godfather coming out, and there wasn't many sci-fi movies that were coming out that were so great. You had 2001 Space Odyssey and Planet of the Apes, which, yes, were good, but they weren't as big, of course, as Star Wars, and sci-fi other than that wasn't really known. There was Star Trek, but it took Star Wars for Paramount to actually revive the Star Trek industry. If it wasn't for Star Wars and its impact in the sci-fi community and the sci-fi marketing, Star Trek probably wouldn't even be happening right now. And no offense, Trekkies, you might be quoting me and telling me I'm a dumbass for saying this, but I honestly think if it wasn't for Star Wars, you guys wouldn't be as big as you are now. But I rest my case. So 1977, the movie The Phantom Menace comes out, and it's a flop. Why is it a flop? Well, because it's a flop now. In 1999, it was received very well. Well, no, it did very well money-wise. Of course, it's Star Wars, but it was received poorly as time went on. And it's the same thing that's kind of happening with The Force Awakens, ironically. But let's just say in 1977 it comes out. A lot of people probably would have been turned off by the idea of the politics inside the movie and the cringy acting given by little Anakin Skywalker and the bad dialogue. However, things might be different considering the fact that in the prequels, George Lucas had a lot of yes men that would do anything he asked for. However, in the originals, people would go, George, this is a stupid idea and you should change it. So that might have happened in 1977, but we're saying The Phantom Menace is as it is right now in 1977. So it wouldn't have probably done as well, considering that it didn't do as well in modern times. Yes, it was one of the highest grossing films of all time, but the reason it was is because we already had Star Wars. People wanted to go see The Phantom Menace because it's another Star Wars movie after, what, 20 years of not having one? Oh, it wasn't 20 years, it was like 15? My bad. But anyway, so Star Wars comes out in 1999. People were excited. Why? Because it's another Star Wars movie. 1977, you didn't have this impact. 1977, people didn't know what Star Wars was about. They just saw the posters going a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And as time went on, yes, they got a little intrigued, but they didn't have a base behind it. And all of George Lucas's friends and directors, besides Steven Spielberg, told him, dude, this is going to flop. So if The Phantom Menace came out and it did as bad as it did in modern times, Star Wars probably wouldn't have ever happened, and it probably wouldn't have continued on. But let's say Attack of the Clones came out, which I feel like is the worst movie of all time. Well, not all time of all the Star Wars movies, but that's my my perception of it, basically. But let's say it kept going with Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. Revenge of the Sith would have probably been received very well because it is received well to today's standards, at least. But in the 70s and 80s, these movies would have been received differently. You had big, massive battles that were happening in space, which a lot of people would actually really like. And I still think Star Wars would have a huge fan base, but just not as big as it would now. Also, here's a huge point for me, a lot of the big culture phrases that we had from Star Wars are going to be gone. They're not going to be as iconic as they were. Because Star Wars, you had, I find your lack of faith disturbing. Aren't you a little short for Stormtrooper? The Force binds us, and may the Force be with you. The Force will be with you always. Run, Luke, run. I thought they smelled bad on the outside. You scruffy looking nerd. I mean, you can go on all day about these quotes. There's so many that come from the originals itself, but you don't get that many from the prequels, which is a little disheartening, but you do get some there from like, hello there, and that's one of my favorites, but I mean, that's literally it. There's not that much coming from the prequels. However, the prequels did have a good twist. It had Palpatine becoming Darth Sidious, which a lot of people would have been shocked by. Not as shocked, however, by the Luke, I am your father. And that scene would have been completely killed, sadly, and this is the biggest point for me, is that if the prequels came out first, that scene would be ruined. You would no longer be surprised if you heard, no, Luke, I am your father. Because you know, well, he doesn't even say no, Luke, he just says, no, I am your father. But anyways, that wouldn't be a big scene anymore. Why? Because you already know. You know that Darth Vader is Anakin Skywalker. Why do you know that? Because you saw the prequels. You saw episodes 1, 2, and 3. Therefore, when the episodes 4, 5, and 6 came out, you would be interested in it, but you would be like, oh, well, there's Anakin Skywalker. And that scene that happened in Empire Strikes Back, you would say, wow, alright, I already knew that, though. The toy aspect of it would probably still be the same. The prequels would still impact the toy industry as much as the originals did, considering the fact that the toy industry was just taken over by Star Wars. And Lucas literally funded a lot of The Empire Strikes Back just by selling toys. So the toy aspect would be the same. Would the practical effects be the same, however? ILM was created by George Lucas because no company would really back him up for the original Star Wars. And it'd probably be the same thing for the ones in 1977. So let's say the Phantom Menace comes out and he has to make ILM. That probably would have the exact same impact on special effects and practical effects as it did back then as it will now. So there's that aspect of it. But I honestly don't think that Star Wars would be as popular as it is now if it wasn't for it being released the way it was. Episodes 1, 2, and 3 were released in solely just to explain the story of how it all happened, how it all started, how episodes 4, 5, and 6 came to be because of episodes 1, 2, and 3. It's very interesting to think about. There's a lot of things that would be changed. Movies wouldn't be the same at all. If Star Wars was a flop, no, not many people would be inspired by it. J.J. Abrams probably wouldn't be a director. We would have missed a lot of his movies. Steven Spielberg probably wouldn't have such a good E.T. movie going if it wasn't for it. We wouldn't have the Indiana Jones series if it wasn't for Star Wars. A lot of movies, believe it or not, idolize Star Wars. They try to copy Star Wars, not scene by scene, but they try to copy a lot of the story of it. And it's just quite amazing to really think about how much of an impact this thing had, considering the fact that no one expected it to be so great. And so if it was one of those things where people said, Lucas, this is going to flop, and it flops, like it most likely would if Phantom Menace came out, nothing would happen. Maybe the episodes 2 and 3 came out, Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, but then what? You wouldn't have the games that you have now. Knights of the Republic, never going to happen. Jedi Knight, probably would have happened, but prequel version. There'd be so many things that change. And I know Knights of the Republic isn't based off the originals, but it still was hugely impacted by Star Wars itself, and if everything changed, a lot would have changed. There would be so many different things. You wouldn't have the video of Hillary Clinton saying, and may the Force be with you, and shit like that probably would never happen because Star Wars was released in a different time. And in 1977, when sci-fi movies aren't popular, if you get a bad sci-fi movie, well then, you don't have Star Wars. So let's say it came out in 1999 like it did, but you didn't have a Star Wars before it. Honestly, I think it'd be the exact same thing. I think it would be a flop, considering the fact that critics are a lot more harsh nowadays than they were back then, or at least in my opinion they were. I think they'd criticize the acting even more. Because let's be honest, in A New Hope, the acting wasn't that great. Carrie Fisher, God bless her, and may she rest in peace, wasn't the best actor in the world. And things would be honestly different. You wouldn't have the Batman voice, or not the Batman voice, the Joker voice in the Batman series that you do for Joker by Mark Hamill, because Mark Hamill wouldn't be a popular actor. A lot of the Harrison Ford movies, like Air Force and Indiana Jones, would have never happened because Harrison Ford wouldn't have been popular. Carrie Fisher, she might have been popular considering her mother, Debbie, but you really never know. So stuff like that would be different. You wouldn't have the cool, iconic scenes that you do in some movies. You wouldn't have all the parodies that we've had, and the people trying to not even make fun of Star Wars, just follow it, like Family Guy and Robot Chicken making their own Star Wars versions and making a lot of humor from it. Probably wouldn't have happened because they probably would not have been fans. Hell, honestly, you never know. Family Guy and Robot Chicken might not even happened without Star Wars, because it had such an impact on everything, on movies and how things were, done. And if it came out in 1999 and yet again was a flop, I mean, nothing would happen. This video might as well just be called "What Happened If Star Wars Never Happened?" because the prequels have done so badly compared to the originals. If it came out first, no one would want to see the originals. No one would want to see 4, 5, and 6 because 1, 2, and 3 were done so badly. This isn't a bashing of the prequels. This is just simply saying they were received poorly. Now, I'm not saying they're horrible movies. I watch them from time to time, of course. But critically, they were not received well. Marketing-wise, they were doing great, but why were they doing so great? Because it's Star Wars. Honestly, if Star Wars was going to be a success, it had to be released in the time it was. 4, 5, and 6 in 1977, 1980, and 1983, instead of 1, 2, and 3 in those times. Why? Because Star Wars revolutionized everything it did. It made lightsabers, and it made them popular. And of course, the prequels would have done the exact same, but the bad acting, the bad dialogue, sadly the bad direction, and overuse of CGI, and even bad CGI in some scenes, would have been a turnoff for many people. And Star Wars would have just been another weird sci-fi film that you see on the Sci-Fi Channel, which no one watches. So that's honestly what would happen. Star Wars would not be where it is if the prequels came out first. There would be so many things that changed. Your life, you probably wouldn't have even been born. People met over Star Wars. People love Star Wars. They go to conventions for Star Wars, and you have some asshole behind a computer making a video about Star Wars because of how impactful it was. The music by John Williams. Was it good in the prequels? Yes, it was downright amazing. His career probably wouldn't have been altered at all if it was released in 1977 or 1999, considering the fact that how beautifully he made the sound in the films. He made the music just amazing. Like, you can't deny how great they are. I personally like the ones from the prequels a little better than I do the originals, and that's just me being young. John Williams wouldn't have been as popular, most likely, but he still would have had a huge impact on the film industry when it comes to music. I think he's more popular because of the theme musics that came from the originals, and the prequels were doing very well. The sequels with the the Force Awakens, whatever. But still, there wouldn't be as much things going on as there are now if there wasn't for Star Wars, and if it came out in the order it did. Mark Hamill wouldn't have had a great career. Alec Guinness probably wouldn't have even played Obi-Wan Kenobi because, I mean, hell, who would have played Obi-Wan Kenobi back in 1977? If it was 1999 and it was still Ewan McGregor, his career probably would have been a flop, unless he continued to do what he does and, be a great actor. But even Natalie Portman's career almost died because of the prequels. So honestly, ask yourself, what would happen if the prequels came first? Personally, I think Star Wars would be dead. I don't think we would have the games that we have now. I think there'd be some fans of it, just like there are fans of almost anything. But I don't think it did have such a huge culture impact and affect the world as it did. Star Wars was inspired, by Nazi Germany, basically. World War II was a huge inspiration for the originals. And you can kind of make the argument that Lord of the Rings was the same, but Lord of the Rings would have done it as well. And people would have been like, well, it's just copying Lord of the Rings on that aspect. Though, even though J.R. Tolkien says that it wasn't inspired by World War II, a lot of people think it was. So things like that would have completely changed. Star Wars impacted Lord of the Rings films as it is, if you didn't know that. I mean, Peter Jackson praised it. If you watch the appendices or whatever you call it, if you watch those for Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson literally says, Star Wars really inspired me for this stuff. I got this from Star Wars. They took advice from ILM, I believe, on some of the special effects. I mean, there's so many things that Star Wars impacted that if the originals hadn't came out at the time they did, life itself would be completely different. Hell, Donald Trump might not even be president at the moment. And I'm a Trump supporter, but it probably would not have happened. So there's so many things that Star Wars impacted that would be completely different. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know this was a lengthy one, and I know I'm just kind of like raving on about what would be like if, you know, the prequels came out first, but it's a very interesting topic that no one talks about. And I hope someone ups me on this video and makes a list of what would happen, because I'm just sitting here talking about it because I have no idea what would. Would the economy be the same? Probably not. Toys would be completely different. Special effects would be completely different. Everything would be different, and that's just weird to think about. So comment your thoughts below. What do you think if the prequels came out first and the originals came out later? How do you think it would affect the world? How do you think it would affect you? Personally, I know it affected me a lot. Star Wars had a huge impact on religion and culture, identity. It's something that connected to all cultures and not just one. And that's very interesting to think about. So, comment your thoughts below, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm Star Wars Only. I will see you all next time. May the Force be with you, always.